Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion podcast, where we spread inspiration one story at a time. I am your host, Holly Jean Jackson. Each episode spotlights and interviews one transformational leader, their stories, and their advice for how you too can lead yourself and others through inspiration. If you are a visionary seeking to uplevel your leadership skills, then this is the podcast for you. I invite you today to spread inspiration like a contagion. Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion movement. Welcome to episode 41 of the Inspiration Contagion podcast. This week's episode is also being recorded for YouTube. So if you'd prefer to watch instead, please check out the show notes for that link. This week's guest is Julia Gentry. By the age of 23, Julia built a successful company in real estate that bought and sold millions of dollars worth of investment property only to end up $100,000 in debt. She then rebuilt her career as a business coach, advising hundreds of entrepreneurs how to build a successful business. She bought the house and nice cars, had a few babies, obtained the American dream, only to realize it wasn't her dream. Every night as she crawled into bed, she had this nagging question in the back of her mind. Is there something more? That's when she had a midlife awakening. Thankfully, she identified the answer to that question. It was yes, and has become a wake-up call that the world didn't know they needed. As a dreamer, author, business owner, Jesus follower, passionate wife, wild mom of 4, and the founder of Dream Factory & Co., she provides a fresh, bold approach to creating greater alignment in this life and encourages a more awakened way to live. She is on a mission to create a massive wake-up call that ignites people to live as the dreamers that they are in their faith, family, career, and community. Currently, she is in go mode to release her book, Dream, I Dare You, set to be released mid-November. And all she wants to know is this: will you take her dare? With that, welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's so great to have you here. Sounds like we have a lot to talk about. So let's just dive in and have you tell us a little bit more about your background.
Oh man. It's fun to hear someone else say your background, we get so close to it. So, my background, I think I'm appreciative of my journey. I think at some level, when you reach a heightened level of awareness, and even as I've read so much of your stuff, right? Sometimes when we're so close to it, we don't realize it until we're able to gain a higher level of consciousness to go, everything was actually leading me to where I needed to be. But for me, my background, I happened to marry an entrepreneur. I don't know that I was bold enough at the time to be crazy enough, right, to become an entrepreneur. And that was really my first, I don't know, my first into realizing how stressed out I really was, because I happened to marry a big risk taker and someone that just had these creative juices on the inside of them, and he looked at the world very differently. And so I think I just happened to marry right, right. And so my journey of becoming an entrepreneur and finding growth and passion and just God in a totally new level was really through my husband. So together we built a company in real estate, as you mentioned. We hit the market spot on in 2008 because we specialize in short sales. Little did we know the world was going to be needing our services. And so I cut my teeth in not knowing any better to be different in real estate, right? That was my first step into doing things differently. When everybody was getting out of real estate, we were getting in. When everybody was saying it's impossible, we were saying, why not? And that's really where my journey started, in just doing things differently and looking at the world from a different perspective, looking at business from a different perspective, looking at marriage from a different perspective. That's where it all started for me.
Yeah, that's really valuable too. And it's so interesting that your journey into entrepreneurship started with marrying right, which kudos
Yes.
to you. And I think it's really fascinating because a lot of people, when they go through their journey for how they got into entrepreneurship, oftentimes it's led by, maybe a health scare, but
Yeah.
sometimes it can be a good thing, like the
Yeah,
person that you marry or a good friend in your life, a mentor that sparks something inside of you and helps
totally.
you realize that there's another way. So
Yeah.
that's really great.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what makes you an inspirational leader, or what's your secret sauce?
Oh my gosh. So I love, first of all, when we had got connected, I looked up the word inspiration. And maybe for your listeners, you're like, yeah, we know this. Holly preaches this all the time. But I loved it. Right. It says the definition says the process of being mentally stimulated, especially to do something creative. Um, I'll be very honest, that was not in my DNA, starting out. Like, I learned how to protect myself. I learned how to do all the right things, quote unquote, right? I learned to avoid pain early on. I'm a product of divorced family. And even though, I'm a major statistic, that moment when I was 5 years old truly created so much stress in my body that I didn't know how to live any other way but guarded. So I was very logical. I was very realistic. I learned to say all the right things, do all the right things, right? Like, so for me, I have had to unlearn how to protect myself and learn how to just live open. I've had to learn how to be creative. And I think so often most of us look at life of like, no, I'm just logical, right? I'm left brain. Like, we see ourselves with such an identity that stops us from our truest identity. It's our worldview of ourselves, not even just the world around us. It's our worldview of ourselves. And so for me, it wasn't until I started to rethink things and started to learn how to drop my guard and my protective mechanisms that I was able to even look at myself as creative or as an inspiration, because I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, even in your story, when you saw the bear, you're like, okay, logic, reason. Like, I loved your story in that because I'm like, this is just so true how we look at life as the bear. Everything is the bear. And so logically, right? Analytically, responsibly, tactically, we're just so about those things. But the problem is we are Googling more, but we know less, right? And so I don't even really remember the question that you asked me. Will you ask me that again?
What's your secret sauce?
My secret sauce is that I've learned to get out of my head and into my heart, right? Like, I have had to learn and fight my way through getting out of a very logical, rational, realistic, protected mindset and learn how to get into such a deeper intuitive, right? Instinct. That's my secret sauce now. And it's not that I'm not challenged with that every day, but my secret sauce is learning how to function at a much deeper level.
Yeah, and I think right now, this is going to be released in January, but we're experiencing the pandemic and whatnot,
Yep.
and this is an opportunity for people to, either numb out and watch Netflix
Yes.
or tune in and listen to that still quiet voice of intuition we have to redefine success for ourselves instead of allowing society and others to define it for us. And like you said, to, really re rewrite our mindset to
Totally.
think about opportunities versus just logic. Because if we let our brains and our minds and our logic to dictate our next choice, then we're typically going to let fear take over. We're going
Totally.
to, yeah, we're going to limit ourselves, box ourselves in. And so, yeah, even with the bear story, the reason I love that is because I was actually out there to get quiet and
Yes.
to deal with
Totally.
my mental chatter, and then the bear comes and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is it was crazy, but it was kind of this out of body experience facing the bear too.
Yeah, but
So
here's why this is so brilliant. So a couple of thoughts on that. All of us like the idea of being still, right? Prior to the pandemic, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, I could just use a break, or oh my gosh, what would it be like to be quiet? Or oh, if I had more time, right? Like, be careful what we wish for, right? Because, and I'm not suggesting that COVID hasn't dramatically, in some really good ways and in some really hard ways, flipped our world. However, across the globe, it's given us an opportunity to be still. But just in your experience, right? All of us start to go to be still, and what shows up? The bear every time, right? Because the brain, we're not asking you. So many times people are like, well, Julia, dreaming is such an ambiguous, like woo woo, like get real, right? That was my dad. That's why I didn't live this way, because I think if he was here, he'd go, hey, I didn't say that. Well, in a certain way you did, right? Because it was very much about all the things that made sense. And so what we're not understanding is that the brain is designed to keep you safe. It's designed to keep you where you are. And it does that by premise of our past. Like, look back and let's look at all the details and all the facts and all the experiences that prove that you're going to get hurt again, right? That the world doesn't have your back, that God is bad, that relationships don't work, right? It uses the past as its information. That's not where our heart and our gut comes from, right? Our heart and our gut comes from this much deeper, uninhibited, unlimited resource, right? I call it heaven on earth, like a much more profound way to live that directs us of where we need to go in our future. But the problem is there's 3 layers to this, right? I call that the chatter layer, the constructive layer, and then the creation zone, right? We get into a still state. We get out in our forest to be quiet. And what shows up is the chatter. It's the freaking bear. You know what I'm saying? Like, the brain starts to go crazy of like, this isn't logical. And what about this? And well, what if this happens? And what about this? And what about that? And well, my brother's sister's cousin's going to judge me for this. And then last time I did that. And the chatter shows up so loud in our life that we give it attention, right? Because whatever is loudest is what we're going to give our attention to. And whatever we give our attention to is going to have our life. And so what happens is the bear gets our life because we look up and it's loud enough for long enough that I focus so much on the fear, worry, doubt, excuses, reasons, anything, even reality, right? But I give my attention to that for so long that I literally create a disconnect between my head and my heart. And now I basically go, okay, I'm going to say that the rational mind here, which is really, Einstein says it, it's just the servant, but I've given so much kudos to the servant that I've forgotten the gift, right?
Yeah.
That's why I think your bear is so brilliant, because physically it happens, but we don't realize that literally, emotionally, spiritually, it happens in those moments of being still because we're not used to the quiet space.
Yeah. And this is why people refuse to go to that quiet space
Totally.
and like because ironically enough, the quiet space takes a lot of effort to create quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are still, it takes regular practice. So for
Yeah.
me, I meditate every morning. I do
Mm-hmm.
affirmation work every morning. I do
Yeah.
breath work before bed. Otherwise, my mind is so loud that yeah, I'm going to
Yep.
choose Netflix to block out all of that noise. But the reality is a lot of people can't sleep at night because
Yeah.
then their mind is so noisy and it's dictating everything. And for me, I like to, I don't know if you've seen the movie Inside Out with the characters and the
Yes.
emotions. I always look at like fear as taking over when my mind goes to that negative spiral and I'm
Yeah.
going down that rabbit hole. And I always have to remind myself that I don't want fear driving the car of my life. And so I'm
Totally.
like, cool, fear. Thank you for sharing that. That's
Yes.
really great information. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen. And
For
I'm
sure.
not going to choose to take action based on that. I'm going to choose something else.
Totally. Yeah. And we're a big proponent. I'm a visual too. And so what I picture in my head when I get to that place is 2 lanes, right? Like, and I call it pick your hard. And because the reality is fear is hard. Living a life in fear is hard. Living a life in doubt and worry is really, really hard. Living a life of faith and creativity and boldness, right? Chasing your dreams, it's hard too. Really hard. Being fit is hard. Being fat is hard. Being single is hard. Being married is hard. Having money, having no money, it's all hard, right? They're to some level, what doesn't serve us is trying to pick the path of least resistance, thinking it's going to get us what we want. And so I try to tell myself, okay, in this moment, I have 2 lanes. I'm going to make a decision, right? Cognitive therapy says every thought creates an emotion, every emotion creates an action, and every action is going to create my results. So if I make a decision in fear right now, I'm going to harvest that later on. Right. If I make a decision to not do something, to avoid, to be busy, to compare, I have to grow that seed later. It's going to show up in my life in one way or another. And so I picture these 2 lanes where it's like, okay, I don't get somewhere in between. There is no gray. I'm either going to live in fear or I'm going to live in faith. I'm going to live in doubt or I'm going to pursue my dreams, right? I'm either going to face this bear or I'm going to run from it. I have to pick my hard. And even in that moment when my ego's like, I don't want to face the bear. I'm like, yeah, but what do I want most on the other side? Do I want to keep
Yeah.
running from this bear or do I want to face it and get to the other side of the bear? You know, like pick the result I want most because it helps me pick my action steps today.
Yeah. And I find that when I'm listening and walking through intuition and faith in myself, faith in the universe,
Yeah.
faith in God, that it's actually easier. So it's hard. Yes, I agree. But things kind of line up magically and organically when we're in
Yep.
flow. So for me, I know
Yep.
which lane I'm in. Or for me, I like to say that it's a farm. So there's two
Yeah.
different farms because we're planting seeds that are going to be beautiful or seeds that are going to build these weeds in our
Yep.
garden that are going to make things difficult. And so I'm choosing constantly to be in flow and building that
Yes.
garden versus those weeds, because then
Totally.
it's a lot of work to pull those weeds later.
Totally.
So,
You know, what's interesting though, and talk me, maybe you can, it was so interesting because I would agree when you are in alignment, which is what my book talks about, creating greater alignment, right? When you're in that place, it is magical. Like it's almost crazy. However, I lived so far out of flow for 25 years, right? I was the controller. So if you look at someone, this was my approach. The lazy river is kind of what I picture flow, like just flow. A controller looks at that and goes, "Are you mad? Like, are you out of your mind? There's what happens if this?" And, like flow can sound so scary and intuition can be so far removed for people that it's like, I don't even trust myself. I've never trusted the flow or the times that I've been flowing before. All of these things happen to me. So I tend to, because that was my experience, I attract a lot of people who are like, here, like, I don't want to flow. Like I've lived my life not flowing. That sounds awful. And that sounds like we need to leave it for the yogis out in the field meditating. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think that people trust that place.
well, and I mean, I'm also one of those recovering controllers and
Okay,
recovering
good.
perfectionists. So I totally understand what you mean. And I like to call my mom Yoda. She's like super wise. And she would always tell me that life is like this river. And when we're in flow, it's really fun and you're just kind of floating down, like you were saying.
Mhm.
But we've all heard the quote, what we resist persists. And so
Yeah.
when we're trying to fight the right flow for our life, we're
Yeah.
basically swimming upstream against a current, and there
Yep.
are rocks and all kinds of obstacles in the way. And so for me, now that I've experienced flow more consistently, I'm more aware of when I'm out of alignment and I'm swimming upstream. And it's
Totally.
really challenging. Like I'm moving across country in less than 3 weeks. And I could sit there and, really worry about everything. But quite frankly, even some of the most difficult conversations that I needed to have been easy because it's the right decision.
Totally.
So it's interesting. Like there are signs that we get when we're out of alignment for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Love it.
So I want to get us back on track for some of
Good.
the stuff
Okay.
we're doing, but what does inspiration mean to you? You defined it earlier, but in your life, what does it mean?
Yeah, I think, the motivational industry and you and I as coaches to some level, I'm not trying to get us out of a job here, but it's a 9 to 11 billion dollar industry, right? Like people are looking for motivation and inspiration. The problem for most is we're looking for that externally, right? Like I am looking for someone else to motivate me, inspire me. So if I go to a retreat or a weekend hoorah or whatever, I am lit up for one day or even a week, but given enough time, I just fall back into old habits, right? Like if I look at my life over the course of the next 3 years, like it actually didn't create transformation. And so for me, inspiration is an inner game, right? It's learning how to light your own fire. And yes, I believe in coaches and outside eyes to help us see what we can't see. I believe in surrounding ourselves with people who have been there, done that, and can go like, "Oop, I wouldn't do that," and "Oh, turn left," like whatever that might be. But I think when we require that those people give us what only we can give to ourselves, we're losing that power, right? And so now I'm needing the world to give me something, which is why in times like this, more people are stressed out than not because I've been relying on external sources to keep me going, keep me alive, feeling good, all the things, right? Whether it's a coach or drugs, doesn't matter. I mean, I've needed things to keep me up and keep me going. Inspiration to me is something that is so built from within, that you've learned how to turn on those heart places, that you've learned how to stay open, that you've learned how to face your bears, right? And you get down the road enough to go, "Oh, this does really work." Like it does really work. And then learning and knowing how to light your fire, how to keep your fire, how to grow your fire, how like that is what inspiration is to me. It's an internal game.
Yeah, I love that. And I doubt either of us will ever be out of business because even when we work with coaches and we find that inner fire, I know that ironically enough, when we're so good at coaching others, we are not necessarily great at coaching ourselves because we
I
need
don't
that
know what
objective.
you're saying. I have no idea. My
So
husband
it's
says it all the time. He's like, aren't you the coach? Aren't you supposed to know the answer? I was like, for everybody else, right? Like for everybody else, for sure.
exactly, exactly. But I completely agree. It's about helping our clients light that fire, build that faith in themselves, keep
Mhm.
inspired, and then just help them stay on track when they need an objective party to give them some guidance or look at something from a different perspective. Because honestly, coaching is really about just giving you more options
Totally.
and holding the faith for that person when they can't. So
Totally. And I think that how you do that, right? Because again, learning this in my own life and then what I do with people is that they're like, yeah, but Julie, you don't understand my reality. You don't know what my bank account looks like. You don't understand where I've been. You don't understand all the things, right? We all have our list and they're super valid, right? Like they are really, they're very valid in our lives. But the way that you start to embody being a creator, right? The first step is we just don't see ourselves as being one. We don't see ourselves as being someone who can inspire ourselves. We don't see ourselves as being creative. Is that we have to realize that whenever we see reality for what it is, the way that we start to embody this is to go, okay, my reality says this, right? The realist in me says it is what it is. But the creative in me says, what do I imagine it to be? Right? That's what inspiration is. It's the ability to imagine something different, not despite what you see, but because of what you see. What is it that you imagine? What is it that we could create from where you are? And I think it's learning how to do both, right? It's the juxtaposition of what is and what could be, not in fear or worry, but like, what do I really, yes, my marriage is breaking down, but I imagine passion and connection, right? My community is losing their mind, but I imagine that we're actually stronger together, right? My bank account says negative 1,000, but I imagine a place that I could be thriving. My career, I'm bored and like unattached, and I imagine that I could be actually attached and really give a damn about what I'm doing. That starts to give us steps, right? Because if I know that I could see, even if for a blink of an eye, a marriage that is passionate and connected, and if I'm in a place that I am disconnected and it's falling apart, connection and passion gives me one next step. Okay, what would I need to do then to have more passion and more connection in my marriage? Well, it's probably the ego, the things I don't want to do, right? It's the like, we need to sit down and have the hard conversation. We need to talk about the things that are distracting us. We need outside help, right? We need some counseling. Maybe we need our pastor. Maybe we need to read a book together. We obviously don't know something, so we need to sit down and know. So it's not that we don't know, it's our resistance to knowing, because then once I know, guess what? I'm responsible, you know?
well, and oftentimes we don't like the answer to that question that we
No.
know. And we're like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to ignore that because I don't want to do the work because it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. So on this journey, I am sure that you've played and toyed with the idea of defining success. So how do you define success for your life and how did you arrive at that definition?
Yeah. So this definition I heard. So when I started my journey in entrepreneurship, I was 21. And I think you hear a lot about money, right? Success is money, or it's having more than you had or what your family had. And so I think, and especially starting in real estate, it's a ton about financial freedom and it's a lot about money. And so through my journey, right, of creating this American dream, making more money some months that most people make in a year, and still feeling this hole, right? And then ending up $100,000 in debt. That's when my first kind of questions around like, wait a minute, success without fulfillment, Tony Robbins says this, is like the ultimate failure, right? And so then I heard John Bevere say that, at the end of our life, I don't believe that there is a God that's like, how many rights did you do and how many wrongs did you do? No, I think that we stand before a God who loves us. He's the creator of the universe and just says, did you do what I called you to do? And that like wrecked me, like, because that's beyond comparison. It's beyond a dollar amount. It speaks to that knowing, when some people are like, yeah, but Julie, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. We always know. Like, how mean, regardless of what you believe, but how mean for the creator of the universe to put us on the planet and go, they're not going to actually know what they're supposed to do. And I'm going to create like this sick game for them to like have fun figuring it out. Like that's, that's horrible in my opinion. So for me, success is, are you doing what you know you're called to do? Are you so tapped into this thing on the inside of you that at the end of your life, you put it all on the table, right? And the Iron Cowboy talks about this in his documentary. He did 50 triathlons in 50 days in 50 states. And here was a man that prior to doing this, he did, I want to say like 20 or 30 in a year, which most people don't do in a lifetime. He gets done and he looks at himself in the mirror and he says, I haven't hit my limit. I haven't hit my threshold, which is why I'm unfulfilled. Even after something that crazy, he was like, I'm not pushing the envelope enough. That is what success is to me. It's finding that edge and that envelope and that thing on the inside of you, not in the brain and the logic or the world around you that goes, I'm in it.
Yeah.
I'm doing it. And it changes every season of our life, right? I have 4 kids under the age of 6 right now, right? Prior to that, we were building businesses in real estate. Now I'm writing a book. I've never written a book, right? Like there's always these kind of edges, but it's like this fulfillment of potential, right? And then knowing once you get to the top, it's like a switchback. There's more, right? We're never there. So it's like these constant switchbacks in life, but it's playing the edge of those switchbacks. That to me is what success is.
I love that visual of the switchbacks because it's a steep climb of the switchbacks, but it's also steeper if you don't do them. So if we don't
Totally.
do those steps along the way in each season of what we're called to do, then we're
Yep.
not hitting that edge and we're not going to hit the summit of that mountain, which is a great, beautiful definition of success.
Totally.
Now, we know that on the journey to that mountaintop, that success journey, that there are challenges and obstacles. So, Julia, what are some of the challenges and obstacles that you faced on that summit to success?
Yeah. This is one of the principles I talk about in my book. It's called Live Till Failure. And I remember 3 years ago, right before I started writing this book, we sold everything to travel the country in an RV. We had 3 kids at the time under the age of 5. And most people are
Wow.
like, oh, that's the perfect time to travel. And you're like, well, you obviously don't have 3 kids under the age of 5. You don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I'm a skinnier girl, so wouldn't consider myself crazy strong. I'm fit, but I don't know that I would say I'm strong. So at this time I was like, okay, I really want to gain some muscle tone. I want to be stronger. So I didn't ask for input. This tells you how much I really wanted to get strong, right? I didn't ask for input. I didn't get outside eyes. I didn't ask my husband, who's like this dope human being of a physical body. I didn't want input, right? So here's what I decided to do. I was just going to do more of what I had already done, right? Because if I run faster, if I spin faster, if I do weights faster and more, that'll work, right? Because we think if I just keep doing more of what I've been doing, I'll get different results. It's never the case. And so I remember after 3 months and almost hitting just a point of exhaustion, saying to my husband, not wanting input, but just complaining. I'm venting, my son calls it. I'm just venting. I'm not complaining. There's a big difference. He looks up from me. My kids are playing outside in the RV. He looks up and he says, are you lifting till failure? And I was like, what did you say? Right? Your whole workout routine like flashes before your eyes because you're like, no, I'm lifting until I'm uncomfortable. I'm lifting until I don't like it. I'm lifting till I'm sort of sweating, but am I lifting till failure? No. That changed that principle in all areas changed everything because the things that have kicked my butt were the lessons I needed to learn, right? Like making a ton of money and then losing a ton of money. I mean, we were truly, Holly, making more money than most people make every month, like every year in a month. Only 3 years to end up $100,000 in debt. There was such a level of misunderstanding and worldview about money that I just didn't know, right? So making a ton of money and losing a ton of money kicked my butt. That journey when we sold everything, right? Like we put our identity in house and stuff and routine. And when we did that and traveled the country for a year, though it was amazing, shattered my safety, security, stability, right? On external things. That was a game changer, right? My walk with God. I grew up in a really strong Christian home. So I quote unquote knew all the right things to say. I knew all the Bible verses. I didn't know, right? It wasn't until my activated faith actually offended my concept of faith that everything changed, right? Having kids broke me one after another, 4 kids. Every time one came out, it opened my heart in ways that I didn't know I always needed. Every time a kid came out, I was like, no, you are going to ruin my rational mind. I really remember thinking that in the hospital room, going, you are going to kill my worldview of love. You're going to demolish, right? It like gives me goosebumps and brings tears to my eyes, because every time you hold a baby, you go, you're going to destroy my fear. Right. And so all of those things, all of those.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I love that last comment of how all of that love from that newborn baby is helping destroy those layers of fear, those
Oh
layers of,
man.
walls that we put up in
Yep.
our worldview.
Yep.
And you're right, because there's so much innocence and joy and love in childbirth, and having a new innocent baby that
Yeah.
has a really beautiful worldview that has not been ruined yet
Totally. And
by
because you and I
life.
know yes, we know so much about worldviews that watching them even 4, 5, 6, you're like, they're resilient and they're bold and they're forgiving and they're creative and oh, it it kind of wrecks me every day. And the minute that I find that like resistance in the day of like, come on kids, like do your chores and and I get to that zone, I'm like, oh, I'm missing it. I'm so in my head today that like they force me to look at what it means to live creative and inspired and uninhibited and unconditional every day. It's just crazy.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reminder to stay on track and to keep, in the right alignment as a coach as well.
Totally.
So, Julia, I'd love for you to share perhaps one story of inspiration that you're known for with our listeners.
Oh my gosh. So I think it really all started when we sold everything. We what got us to that point, we had built a successful company in real estate only to end up in my mom's basement, which is really cool. So my husband will say that was like the highlight of his life, of living in his mother-in-law's basement. Then we rebuilt our careers, right? He got back into real estate. I started doing business coaching for about 4 years. And when I was doing business coaching, right, it was all the lessons I had learned. So it was about strategic planning and process mapping and hiring and all of those things. And after 4 years, I realized that it didn't matter how many tools you gave someone, that there was still this invisible barrier, right? Like I'm literally telling you step by step how to run a business, how to look at your numbers, how to market. And there was still 70, 80% that just wouldn't do it, right? And it was then that we really did have our own midlife awakening. And I think, most people call it a midlife crisis and it happens in your 40s and 50s. For me, it was just at the beginning of my 30s, because I looked around and went, this isn't doing it for me. And it's not because I'm not grateful and it's not because I'm not appreciative. It's because there's something more. And I think the courage, I think the courage to literally change your routine and to sell everything that you own and to get in an RV without a plan nor an agenda, to let the spiritual awakening happen, to reconnect to yourself, like that for me was probably the most pivotal time in my life, in my career, in what mattered most. And I just started opening up to a whole new level. I think that was it for me, for sure.
Yeah, well, and doing that too is forcing yourself to have more faith in the
Mhm.
world, have
Mhm.
more faith in yourself, because you don't necessarily have a roadmapped plan.
Yep.
And that's really scary for those of us that like to have control, and
Mhm.
we like to know what's next, or we like to plan. Like for me, that sounds terrifying. But at the same time, like I'm sure I could do it now, but I'm like, holy mackerel, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Totally.
Even
And
after all this work.
yes, and we heard that from so many people. And I'm not suggesting, my RV is like your bear, right? I'm not suggesting it is for everyone. However, I thought I was rather enlightened before going on that journey. No freaking way, right? Like we all think we're enlightened until the bear happens or until the RV journey happens. For my husband, it really was an adventure of a lifetime, right? He is just this adventure enthusiast. And so his wasn't as much of an emotional, spiritual journey as mine. But for me, when, my sister-in-laws say this all, oh, I can never do that. I'm too much of a planner. I'm like, no, we're a planner oftentimes to protect ourselves. And I'm not saying everyone needs to go jump in an RV, but I'd like for you to find your RV, right? I'd like
Yeah.
for you every day to be doing something that brings you to your knees, that's demolishing just the safety, security, stability zone of Maslow's hierarchy, gets you looking up and goes, oh my gosh, is there more to life? Is there more to my potential? Like, no wonder I was bored and depressed and depleted and unmotivated and unattached in my world prior, because I wasn't engaged, right?
Yeah.
Like I wasn't engaged in doing the things that mattered. So of course I'm bored. Of course I'm not engaged. I'm not doing anything that matters to me.
Yeah.
That was a big, so the RV is a metaphor for you, right? Like, just like your
Yeah.
bear is, find your quote unquote RV. Yeah, that'll do
Yeah,
it.
find that thing that's a little uncomfortable or a little scary and just take that action today to discover more about yourself and learn.
Totally. Yep.
So, Julia, you identified as a heart-centered leader. So, I'd
Mhm.
love to hear from you on how you define heart-centered leadership. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think it's just okay. So again, we're going back to when we are head centered, right? I'm focused on logic. I'm focused on reason. I'm focused on a lot of times the past, right? I'm looking at the facts. Fair. Super. I mean, I think as a leader, we have to be aware of those things. We have to look at reality in the past for what it is. However, to be a heart centered leader means I understand that there is so much more going on. Like, I have a different perspective that so many times, right? Like, if you follow the journey of Nike, 10 years, that guy is in the freaking red, right? Like, his book is amazing because no logic said to keep going, right? You look at Martin Luther King Jr. Logically, that did not make sense for him to take a stand the way that he did, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so for me, a heart-centered leader is someone who is able to go so much deeper, right? And to be able to understand that there is more to life, and they are more about where they're going and what they can't see with their real eyes because they see at a much deeper level, right? They
Mhm.
see the possibilities around them. They see in any area, their faith, their family, their career, their community, that there is potential here, that there is a problem, which means there's a solution, that there is an obstacle, which means that there is a way over or through, right? Like, that you're able to see at a much deeper level, right? My
Yeah.
my definition of dreaming that I give in the book is the ability to have great and intense focus and a deep absorption of thought in a different realm that brings about possibilities with the consideration of people around you. That's what this means.
Yeah.
I'm able to go much deeper in a way deeper level, right? And then I'm able to quote unquote see something, and then I can pull that out in the world around me with the consideration of people around me. That's what it means to be a heart-centered leader.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like today more than ever, it really is so important to be tapped into the heart center
Mhm.
for leadership because it's so easy for us to allow people around us to naysay or say that, oh, that's not possible. You can't do that. There's no way. And like you said, it's good to have allow influence to some degree from people, especially those that are supportive of you and have ideas and could add from a collaborative perspective. But it's also equally important to not let people bring you down or put you off course because only you know what is on course for you. And so like that's where the heart-centered leadership stuff is so critical.
So, well, and even, I mean, talk about COVID, right? Most of my clients, I deal with people who are doing probably one-on-one anyways, 5 to $25 million of revenue. And they happen to have been in real estate, food, catering, and restaurants. Faucet turned off. Like, that didn't even happen in 2008, right? In the real estate market. Like, one day they have a gross revenue projections of 10 million. The next day, zero, right? Like, we're talking at a massive scale, having staff of 50 to 100 people. Like, this is big, right? And to watch these people who had done this coaching, right, and had been doing push-ups behind the scenes, right, like doing push-ups in their belief systems and their mindset and where they're going and what was most important to them. So when obstacles do hit, as big as this one was, their whole idea was, it's a good thing I don't need the world around me to dictate what I see in the world within me. Now we're just going to have to create options. And what all of them said was, Julia, for the first time, we'd been talking about this idea of right dreaming and heart leadership. And at some level prior to COVID, all of us still felt like we had things in control, right? Like, here's projections as a leader, staff. This is where we're going as a family. This is what we're doing. We're going to Hawaii on these days. Our gross revenue is going to look like this, right? All the things, until we have to look at our staff and go, I have no clue. I don't know what we're doing next week. I don't know how we're making payroll next month. I don't even know how to do projections for 2021. You know what I'm saying? Like, that level of holding space to go, I don't know, but I know we do know. and I trust that God is good, and I trust that we've been through hard things before and that we can create whatever, right? And they get creative with it. That to me is really the test of heart leadership, is to be able to hold space, to be able to even share with those around you. Like, I don't even know how we're going to do this, but we are. You know what I'm like, waiting for those but God moments, but we are. We're going to figure this out. That to me is what this is all about. It's not having all the answers. It's not having all the logic. It's not having all the projections. Those are great. And when we can have them, have them. But I just think that we're missing a space of like, we don't know how, but we know that we're going to go. Like, that's where the impossible happens.
Right. And I mean, I think that's the definition of heart leadership is you don't necessarily know how, but you
Mhm.
know that that's the direction you're headed in. And
Yeah.
you can be honest and authentic with your team and rely on them to
Yep.
figure out that next pivot. So
Yep.
that's beautiful. I love that. So, Julia, at what age did you start believing in yourself and how do you show belief in others?
Oh, that is such a good question. I I honestly think that I probably made it appear that I've always believed in myself, right? Because I was that girl, get the good grades, do the right things. So I think I carried a facade that made it that appeared to be very obvious that I believed in myself. I didn't. I was so stressed out. I did the right things out of fear of just not doing the wrong things, that rebuilding a relationship with myself and with God was probably like the biggest wake up call, because I thought I had that, right? Because I had had successes and we had done all the right things and a lot of people came to me, and even as the coach. And I think it really came when we started traveling the country in an RV, and when I felt led to write this book. I've never done something more vulnerable. I've never, and even my editor said, Julie, when you start this journey, it's going to be the most lonely, vulnerable thing you could do. And I was like, nah. Oh man, this project, and now we're starting to travel the country again to go on a quasi book tour and to really get involved in the community and people's lives to wake them up. Holly, I'm not going to lie, this has required me trusting myself in a way I didn't know that I hadn't. Like, so I'm in it. These last 3 years I've been doing push-ups. I've found my threshold. I've found my edge. um so I would say right now I'm in it more than ever before.
I love
Mhm.
that. Yeah, and it takes, pushing through that edge to continue to build that faith and that trust in self and
Yep.
to see what you're capable of. Like I love that analogy of lifting till you fail.
Mhm.
Because really that's what we're supposed to be doing in life
Yeah.
is push the limit until we literally crash or we literally
Totally.
drop. That's how you push the edge. So that's beautiful. So, how do you show your belief in others as a leader now that you've found
Oh,
that for yourself?
I have to be careful. Most people say Julia is like the greatest push, that sometimes I love her and sometimes I hate her. I don't know if you've taken the Enneagram. It's a personality profile. Changed my life and my marriage. I'm an 8. I'm a challenger. So I am a push. And so I oftentimes, I think you're the same, Holly, right? Sometimes I have to be careful because I want it more for people than they want it for themselves. And I have people like that in my life for me too, right? And I know what that feels like when someone's like pushing me to be even better and bigger and greater. And you just feel you just want to put up your dukes. You want to tell them to back off. Why do you love me this much? Why am I all the things? So how do I show people is, I mean, it's that idea of bridging the gap between where you are and where you want them to be, and teaching people how to let it inspire you and not terrify you. Right. And so I am that push for people. That's why people do our coaching. That's why they take our 6-week course, because we go deep, we do it, right? Like, we are on a mission. And so that's my biggest thing, is just pushing people and making them do one more push-up, right? Being the voice of like, I can't do any more push-ups. And I'm like, yeah, baby, you can. And you're going to. Right.
Yeah.
And whether you're farting along the way, right? A good push-up makes us all fart a time or two. I don't care. Right. And so I think people are uncomfortable with that. Like, I would rather hard conversations on the table than putting them underneath the rug. I would rather fart in yoga because I'm holding a hard pose than not try the pose at all. Right. Like, I like real, I like raw, I like the tears. Like, I like being alive. And so how I would say that I do that for people is just like you, just providing the space to go, I'll do push-ups with you. but I'm going to make you do them. Right. Like that, you have to push.
Yeah, no,
Push.
and it's true because like it's a hard balance. So when we're pushing clients, we have to make sure we're pushing them towards what they are defining for success, make sure that
Yep.
they are defining that because it's not about what we want for them, it's about what
Yep.
they want for their life.
Yep.
And I also think, like you said, yeah, I mean, when you're hiring a coach, I think a big part of why people have these objections consciously or usually subconsciously
Yep.
is because they know they're going to be held accountable. And that's terrifying. It's like, well, wait,
Totally.
I want this, but you're going to show me how to do that and
To-
you're going to hold me to taking those steps. Oh no.
Totally.
But that's what it takes to
Yeah.
hit that next level. And for a lot of people, they don't have that discipline or they don't know what that next step is. And so it's great to find people like Julia to work with to get that extra push.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Julia, you have probably have your coach too, and I have my coach, and she
Mhm.
pushes me too. So that's always
Yeah.
great. So we stay just ahead
Totally.
of our clients.
Totally.
So could you share a story of how you lead from the heart?
So, it's interesting. I have an example where this is one of those again that it was probably a big game changer in the RV, and we stopped at a friend's house kind of without unscheduled, and we knew that they were struggling, and I could tell because of the signals of avoidance, right? Like avoidance is always this way that tells people if I'm not willing to have a phone call or if I don't call you back or whatever. So we just happened to stop by with our RV, and we knew that she was struggling with some health issues, and we showed up at her house. She let us come inside, and it was, I mean, I really felt like I was on a show called The Hoarders. Um, and it broke my heart. And you could tell she was trying to kind of clean up, and she was trying to like make it look right. I mean, it was truly, I've seen nothing like it ever before. And I was so stunned and like all the things, like horrified. I was sad. I couldn't believe that she hadn't asked for help. But then you go through all the things, okay, but there's a reason why, and all the things. And so we stayed. We didn't end up staying at their house because I couldn't let my kids crawl on the floor, like all the things. We stayed out in the RV, and the day that we were supposed to leave, I just said to Travis, we have to say something, right? Like again, having to be able the courage to say something to someone, of getting them to where they needed to be when they didn't have the courage to do it for themselves. And so we, with tears in our eyes, sat with her, and we just said, we love you and we cannot let you live this way. Like we won't and we can't. And she just bawled because she's like, I don't know where to start. This is so overwhelming, right? She had 2 babies. Like, how did it get this far? All the things, shame, blame, guilt, right? Then you start to isolate. Now you're by yourself. The demons that come out are horrible. So it resulted in her going, well, my husband's never going to let us. He's so embarrassed that you've even seen this and all the things. And we said, we don't care. We're not leaving here, and we're going to do this together. Fast forward 4 days. We did 5 dumpsters of trash. We spot cleaned their house. We got them new groceries, gave them a shopping list of things to buy. I mean, just did the best that we could, right? With us 4, we had 5 babies at the time under the age of 7 running around the whole time. That wasn't about us, right? That was the courage to say something, to have the hard conversation, to drop all judgments and egos and biases and reasons, and you just make change happen, right? Like even at one point we said, you just start. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to reason with it, all the things. And creating a clean slate is sometimes what's needed, like a fresh jumpstart. That just changed everything for me because it was beyond logic. It was beyond reason. It was so physical. It was so emotional. It was so spiritual that it just changed my approach to people, right? Because that was such a visual manifestation of what even can happen spiritually and mentally and emotionally. Like our insides start to look all gooped up, right? Our financial worldview starts to look all gooped up, and then we keep hiding it, and we keep hiding it because heaven forbid we open up the can of worms, and then we just keep pretending like everything is fine, and it's not fine. So that taught me learning, how can I stand in a place like, why could she not call me and ask for help? Right? Like what can I own of, like, how can I stand more open and more heart-centered, that it's more available for people to go, will you help me? Right? Like your empathy is beyond me. Your compassion is beyond me. Your heart is beyond me. Your passion is beyond me. Like, will you help? That helped me see and create just more of an emotional and mental space to allow people room.
That's beautiful. And there are two things I want to share on that. So the first is there's a book, I don't know if you've read it, it's called The Shack. It's a
Yes.
Christian book. And I love the visual manifestation, like you said, with the hoarding reminds me of in that book and that story, the garden. So the
Yeah.
garden, he's gardening with the Holy Spirit and it's really his soul.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting that we think we can try to walk in someone else's shoes, but we have no idea what's actually
Totally.
happening. And it's manifesting in a garden that's full of weeds, or like you shared, that house, that physical space that's getting cluttered, and that has mental implications and spiritual implications. So it's just a great reminder for us that we never know what's going on with somebody else. They might appear to have the perfect life, but internally they are really struggling, and they're isolating, and having those tough conversations, especially today, has never been more important. So be brave and do that with people you love.
Yes.
And then the second one is, I love how you said, how does this happen where people don't feel comfortable to reach out for help? I think with the way social media is and how we portray these perfect lives, and even as business owners, we are marketing things, but sometimes we exemplify and exude too much perfection, too
Mm-hmm.
much cleaned up corporateness, and we need to be more vulnerable and authentic so that we're approachable, so that
Yeah.
clients feel safe and comfortable and like we are in the same human experience as them. Otherwise, we're creating that threshold and that barrier where it's not safe and it's not comfortable to ask for help.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why even in I'm a wild mom of four. I am really not an advocate for perfection.
Yeah. It's not
No.
worth it. Like, life is
Not worth it.
messy. Let it
But
be
it's so
messy.
true. Like I even had one of my good friends, right? When COVID kind of happened, the first 3 months, I'm watching all of her stuff on Facebook and she's looking great. She's looking great. We go to sit down at her house and she just loses it. She's like, cause I'm not doing well. And I was like, you could have fooled me, girlfriend. Like, I'm not suggesting that you have to share your diary on Facebook, but what is not working well with social media is the appearance that everything is fine, which only creates and can wreak more havoc in the lives of people. Like most of us that aren't fine. Um, yeah, I was like, you're not fine. You should probably not be overly fine on Facebook. Like
Yeah.
don't go overboard, don't go underboard, but like, yeah, I mean, that can be a slippery slope for sure.
Yeah. Just be real. Yeah.
Be real.
The world would be a much better place if we were just real and honest. So, we are going to dive into the lightning round of questions. So,
Okay.
what is your favorite book?
Oh, can I just mine now? Right here, baby. Mine. It's a good thing I really like what I have to say because I had to reread it 17,000 times. I'm in love with this book. I am. I
Great.
just am in love with this book. I got to promote it. My book.
Awesome. Love it. Can't wait to read it. What networking or community group do you love most?
Church.
Awesome. What's the best one piece of advice you would share with others today?
Oh, my dad always used to say, Julia, I hated it, but I love it. How do you eat an elephant? And I'd go one bite at a time. How do you live your dreams? How do you have a hard conversation? How do you build anything? How do you get out of addiction? How? Just one bite at a time.
Love it. Love it. If you could share one message with the world today, what would that be?
Life's too short not to.
Great. And what's the legacy you wish to leave behind?
Oh, I want to live a legacy that showed and taught and created community around us, bringing heaven to earth. Right? I believe that all of us have the answers to the world's greatest questions on the inside of us, and I hope that we create a community of people that live with the light on, right? That shine the light on the world around them and that realize that, yeah, I'm in a world that's broken and needs help and needs love. And instead of judging it or wondering who the heck is going to fix it, that we realize that we are.
Mm, yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. All right, so Julia has been super generous. She's giving away, she has a 26-day challenge that supports people in their journey to rethink. She believes that dreamers think differently. They have to and would love to give the audience free access to that. So that link to the 26-day challenge will also be in the show notes so that you can start taking those steps for that legacy Julia is trying to build, that one bite at a time, one step at a time for building your dream. So Julia, anything you'd like to add on those two items?
No, I would just love people to follow the journey. We're traveling the country, right? We're going to a different state every single month. really with the word of just spreading this word of just igniting the light on the inside. And we're meeting with churches and community groups and entrepreneur groups and MOPS groups. So just follow the journey. My Instagram is at the Julia Gentry. We have a YouTube channel, our own podcast. So if you just really want to awaken the dreamer, right? We would love for you to just join the community to follow the journey.
Love it. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Julia. And to our listeners, I look forward to seeing you on our next show. Thank you for joining the show today. I hope you were inspired. More importantly, I hope you take action. What is one thing you can do in this moment that will inspire someone? Without action, nothing changes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. If this show truly inspired you, we ask that you share it through your network. Help us spread the light and inspiration in the world. I look forward to seeing you here next week.